I've been training to jump higher for 14 years, and I'm gonna show you literally everything I know that you can use to jump higher in 2025. Step one, play lots of sports. Here are all the sports I played growing up: volleyball, basketball, baseball, American football, wrestling. And on top of all that, I was outside all day, every single day, playing games like tag, hide and seek, going on playgrounds. I even had a phase of my life where I was really into parkour. Now, what on earth does that have to do with jumping higher? It's called long-term athletic development. There are some motor patterns that are the foundation for every athletic movement: pushing, pulling, throwing, catching, squatting, hinging, lunging, skipping, running, jumping, landing, even spinning. These are all movement patterns that if you want to become an elite athlete one day, or if you want to reach your genetic potential in terms of jumping higher, that must be mastered when you are a child. And if you're old and you're not a child, bad news, the ship has sailed and you kind of messed up your genetic potential. However, it's still possible to improve. But if you're young, play lots of sports. I can't state enough how important that is. Next, you have to jump a lot, especially if you are young. When you're young, you're not very fast or very strong compared to your adult self. And because of that, the risk of injury when you do stuff is lower. So that's the perfect opportunity to be doing max approach jumps every single day. What does this accomplish? It gives you better jump technique. Jump technique is what your arms and legs do that allows you to jump higher. Somebody with good jump technique is gonna jump higher than someone with bad jump technique, all other things being equal. Literally spending 5 to 10 minutes improving your jump technique can make you jump higher instantly. The day I hit my first windmill was the day that I figured out rhythm and penultimate step. And I literally improved my vertical by like 3 inches in 15 minutes and I hit my first windmill. What does good jump technique entail? It's literally just 2 things: acceleration and lowering. The more speed you have going into your penultimate step, and the longer your penultimate step is, the higher your impulse is going to be. Impulse is a change in momentum. And think of momentum as how badly you want to get hit by something, right? If something's really big and it's moving really fast, it means it's carrying a lot of mass and has high velocity. That means it has a lot of momentum. Now, your mass doesn't change. That's how much stuff is inside your body. The thing that does change is velocity. So the more velocity you have going into a jump, the more impulse there's going to be, the bigger the change in momentum. And the bigger the change in momentum, the higher your exit velocity is going to be when you leave the ground, thus the higher you will jump. So there is a direct correlation between impulse and jump height. And this is the equation for impulse. As you can see, it's how much force you're applying for how much time. So the longer you're applying force into the ground for, the higher you could jump. But you don't want to consciously get lower on your jump approach because it's going to mess up how much force you can apply. Remember, it's 2 parts of the equation: force and time. So how we maximize time is by lowering more through your approach, because the lower you are, the more time you can spend applying force into the ground. And what allows you to lower is your penultimate step. Penultimate stands for second to last. It's a second to last step. And in a 2-foot jump, it's that really big step that jumpers take right before planting those last 2 steps. Like that looks like they hit a trampoline and they jump high into the air. So my tip for improving your jump technique is find a jumper that has similar body proportions to you, that has the same jump style to you. That could be left, right, left leg, right leg, and then compare your jumps frame by frame to their jumps. And I suggest only starting with the last 2 steps. That way you get your penultimate step dialed in. Practice this until it looks good and it feels natural. It's part of your muscle memory. This is gonna take a few hundred to a few thousand reps. Now, the second part of jump technique is acceleration. That's a change in velocity. And one of the biggest mistakes athletes make when it comes to their jump technique is starting too fast. So they start really fast at the beginning of the approach and then they decelerate. They slow down as they go to take their penultimate step. Instead, it should be the other way around. You should start slower, end up faster. This is called your rhythm. And in order to improve your rhythm, start slow. You can literally start by just walking into your approach. At this point, your penultimate step should be mastered. So from there, just take like 2 steps backwards and then practice walking into your approach. And then when the support leg of the penultimate step hits the ground, that's when you want to go as fast as you can. So literally walk into it, go as fast as you can on the penultimate. Then as you become comfortable with that, practice starting with higher and higher speeds as long as there is an acceleration. Decelerating is the worst thing you can do. Avoid it at all costs. So ideally, you had a big background in sports that taught you all the basic movement patterns. You've jumped every day and you have perfect jump technique. And now you're maximizing impulse on your jump. However, to maximize impulse, you still need to improve how much force you can generate. And the ability to generate force is called strength. And the best way to improve your strength is by training with weights. So let's get stronger now. Growing up, I was actually very inspired to weight train because of my dad. He was an Olympic weightlifter in college, and I would go to his weightlifting meets, and I was just always surrounded by that. Then later on in high school, when I started getting more obsessed with like bodybuilding and powerlifting and that type of thing, I came across some YouTube channels like Clarence Kennedy, All Things Gym, which exposed me to the most elite Olympic weightlifters on the planet. And this influenced my training. Now, strength is a specific adaptation. An adaptation is just a change in an organism that allows them to survive whatever environment they're in. The organism in our case is us, our human bodies, and the environment is the weight room. And the adaptations that we're looking for are hopefully ones that are gonna help you to jump higher. Now, strength is a specific adaptation that has been shown to improve how high someone's vertical jump is. For adaptation to occur, there's a few things that must be present. One is variety. So think about your environment, right? If you're always in cold weather, you're gonna adapt to that cold weather. Then if you put an organism into a warm weather environment, there's gonna be some adaptations that take place in their body over time that's gonna allow them to be able to be in that warm weather. Another very important law of adaptation is the law of progressive overload, which literally means that over time, things need to get more difficult. And this is gonna allow you to keep adapting. Then there's the law of specificity, which is how similar an exercise is to the activity that you're trying to improve, which in our case is jumping. And then finally, we have the law of individuality, which means every organism responds differently to different types of stimulus in their environment. So they're going to all adapt differently. Now let's look at strength. In terms of variety, we can manipulate the exercise selection. So doing a squat 1 month versus doing lunges in another month is an example of how we can implement variety. Another way to implement variety is by manipulating volume and intensity. Think of volume as how much work you're doing, sets times reps, and then think of intensity as the percentage of your max that you're doing in terms of strength training. They typically have an inverse relationship. So if you're doing more volume, you have to do lower intensity and vice versa. And over the course of a training plan, you generally want to start at high volumes and move over to lower volumes and higher intensities, and you will have implemented variety into your training. How do you choose what exercise to do? We want it to be specific. Remember, the more specific the exercise, the more adaptation there's going to be for the task that you're trying to improve. And there's a few different ways to look at specificity in terms of strength exercises. The first one is what muscles are being used. When you do a 2-foot jump, your quads and your hips are the muscles that are most used. So strength exercises that work on your quads and hips are gonna have the most transfer over to jumping. Joint angles also matter. So when you do a 2-foot jump, you're in a half squat. So exercises that mimic that 90-degree angle at the knee are gonna also have more transfer. And finally, we have speed of the movement. The time elapsed from when your plant foot hits the ground to when you toe off on your jump, and a jumper that's jumping from like 30 to 40 inches is around 0.3 milliseconds. Now, when you do exercises, you have to accelerate the bar, right? That's part of the equation for force. Force is equal to mass times acceleration. So the bigger the mass and the harder you're accelerating it, the more force your muscles have to generate in order to move that weight. How quickly you accelerate is called your time to peak velocity. So there's a point in a movement where the bar is moving the fastest. How quickly you get to that is your time to peak velocity. And there is a correlation in terms of specificity when you match up time to peak velocities to ground contact times in a jump. So if you measure your time to peak velocity in a lift and it's 0.3 milliseconds, it probably means that it's very, very specific. Now that we know about specificity, let's choose a half squat as our exercise because it has joint angles that are very specific and it's gonna give us the adaptation that we're looking for, which is strength, our ability to generate force. Here's how you manipulate volume times intensity. Generally, you wanna choose a training cycle that's about 4 weeks long, have 3 weeks of loading, 1 week of unloading. During week 1, you wanna have higher volumes, lower intensities. So as an example, let's start off with 5 sets of 6. Before you start doing your program, you want to know how strong you are. So I would suggest testing your maxes. Make sure that this is done in a safe way and that you have proper technique, which you have learned because you practiced all your movement patterns from a young age. And an easy formula to know what percentage to do your exercises at is this table right here. 1 rep, you should generally work at about 100% of your max. 2 reps, 95, 3 reps, 90, 4 reps, 85, 5 reps, 75, 6 reps, 70%. This is a general guideline for when you're mid-training cycle. You can actually do a higher percentage at those reps, But when you're working out, you're typically doing a lot of sets with a lot of reps, and you're gonna be fatiguing those muscles. The actual number is you at like 100% effort, right? But you have to go up and try to hit that same sets and reps again, which is not possible. Following these guidelines allows you to be able to complete the workout and provide a stimulus that's gonna cause you to adapt and gain strength. And then an easy formula that you can follow is week 2, add a set, take away a rep. Move up the percentage by 5%. And then week 3 is the highest intensity week. Do the same thing. Take away a rep, add 5% to the intensity, add another set. So now as you can see, your volume went down, your intensity went up. Then during week 4, you're gonna cut your sets in half, take away a rep, add 5% again, and now you're gonna have high intensity, very low volume, so you're gonna be able to maintain strength during that week, but you're gonna dissipate the effects of fatigue, and then you're gonna super compensate, which means you're gonna jump higher, which is the ultimate adaptation that we're looking for. And now just follow these same principles for other exercises. Generally, you wanna have a knee extension exercise, you wanna have an exercise where you hinge, you wanna hit your posterior chain, you also wanna hit knee flexion, and then you wanna hit your calves. Do this around 3 times a week, and you're gonna gain a lot of strength. Then the next month, you're gonna choose different exercises because we are still looking for variety, right? So instead of squatting, you might do a lunge. Instead of an RDL, you might do a hip thrust. Over time, your strength is gonna go up, which is gonna increase your ability to generate force, which means you're going to jump higher. However, if this is true, why aren't powerlifters the highest jumpers on the planet? It's because as you become more elite, your ability to jump high and generate force very quickly becomes less and less correlated with increasing your ability to generate force in a strength exercise. This is because time is a big limiter in jumping. Remember, the time to apply force in a jump is about 300 milliseconds. How much force you can generate in that short period of time is called explosive strength or your rate of force development. And in exercise science, this is typically known as your power, your ability to generate force very quickly. Power is force times velocity. However, we don't like to use that term very much because it's not a direct one-to-one correlation between power and how high you can jump. Instead, we like to think about things in terms of impulse. Well, we generally still use power as a term for rate of force development exercises that increase your explosive strength. As you become more advanced, you have to do things that increase your rate of force development and not necessarily your maximum ability to generate force. So this is where power exercises come in. My favorite power exercise to do is a power clean. Now, a power clean consists of 3 main parts. There's the first pull off the ground, then there is a double knee bend. So look at my knees here. They go from straight after the first pull to bending again under the bar, and then I jump. That's called the double knee bend. And that leads to the second pull, and then the final part, which is the catch. Power clean is very specific to jumping because it mimics the movement patterns of a penultimate step on the first pull off the ground. And then the time to peak velocity in a power clean is actually very similar to the ground contact times in a 2-foot jump. So it's a very specific exercise that you can use to jump higher. And there are variations that we can do to implement variety into the training. So in our very basic plan, we would start with clean pulls in month 1, power cleans in month 2, and then hang cleans in month 3. There are different types of power exercises. You can see by looking at a force velocity curve. This is a curve that shows the relationship between force and velocity. Generally, the higher the resistance that is experienced, the lower the velocity. So resistance in our case is how much weight is on the bar, for example, in a squat. It's gonna move very slowly. Versus sprinting, which is at the entire other end, there's no resistance, moving through very short ranges of motion, so you're gonna be able to generate a lot of velocity in that movement. Where exercises lie in this curve compared to where jumping lies on this curve also is another way to see how much specificity an exercise has. In a training plan, you wanna go from general to specific. You wanna be very general with high volumes because 1, it's gonna decrease the risk of injury. Generally, the more intense and specific an exercise is, the higher the risk of injury. 2, it'll increase your work capacity. So you're gonna be able to do more without getting hurt later on. 3, the higher volume leads to hypertrophy in specific muscle groups that you need to jump higher. The bigger a muscle is, the more potential it has to produce force. When you're doing the high intensity stuff, that more so improves your neuromuscular abilities, right? So think of your brain. Your brain has nerves that go out and innervate the rest of your body. And the connection of a nerve to a specific muscle fiber is called a motor neuron, also called a motor unit. And there's different types of motor units. There's fast twitch motor units and slow twitch motor units. The ones that we like are the fast twitch motor units because they fire quicker, they're bigger, so they can produce more force more quickly, which means that they are very useful for jumping higher. Higher intensity exercises and exercises that are more specific in terms of jumping recruit more of these fast twitch motor units. So we do the high volume stuff early on to increase the size of your muscle fibers, and then we do the intense stuff later on to improve your neuromuscular efficiency, which is how quickly you can recruit those motor units, how many of them can you recruit, in what order you recruit them, and how coordinated that recruitment is. So now we know what power exercises to do in terms of the Olympic lifts and their variations, and we know what strength exercises to do to increase muscle hypertrophy later on in specific muscle groups, and then increase the intensity later on to increase your neuromuscular efficiency in those strength exercises. Now, let's learn about your tendons. When you look at athletes like John Morant, right? They look pretty skinny, but they jump higher than everybody else, and they make it look really easy. Why is that so? It's because they're able to tap into the power of their tendons. A tendon is a structure that attaches muscle to bone. And when you tug on that tendon, when you stretch it, there is energy that is stored inside it that can be released into kinetic energy. The higher the kinetic energy, the higher the velocity of the movement, which in terms of jumping is your exit velocity, means that you will jump higher. A tendon is literally like a rubber band, right? The more you stretch the rubber band, the more energy is stored that is released into kinetic energy when you let go of it. But how exactly do we stretch the tendon? Remember, a tendon is attached to a muscle. So when the muscle generates tension, right? When you flex it, it tugs on the tendon. So it's like this, and then it tugs on the tendon. So the more force and the more quickly your muscle can produce that force, the bigger the stretch on the tendon and the bigger the release of energy. The best way to get the most stretch on a tendon is by loading that unit of the muscle and tendon very, very quickly, eccentrically. An eccentric action is a lengthening of the muscle and tendon. A concentric action is a shortening of the muscle and tendon. And when performed in succession very, very quickly, it can load up that structure a lot. And remember, the bigger that load, the bigger the release. That is called the stretch shortening cycle. And a very fast stretch shortening cycle is an elastic movement. Elasticity is a material's ability to return to its normal shape after being stretched. Elastic movements are things like jumping and sprinting. Think about it, right? The faster you squat down and up, the higher you're gonna jump, the more elastic your tendon is acting. And the way that we train that stretch shortening cycle is by doing plyometrics. My favorite plyometric is max approach 2-foot jumping because it is the most specific plyometric there is. The same rules of ground contact times, time to peak velocities, joint specific angles, and muscles used apply to plyometrics in terms of specificity. So the activity you're trying to improve is the best plyometric, and then things just get more general from there when you do other plyometrics. Now, true plyometrics, however, overload that eccentric portion of the stretch shortening cycle. And the way we do that is by using gravity to overload. And an exercise that does that very, very well are depth jumps. Depth jumps is when you jump off a high box, it overloads the eccentric, and then you want to shorten the ground contact time as much as possible to cause a very violent reaction force. You're gonna jump back up, and by doing this, your brain basically freaks out, and it's like, what is going on? These forces are insane. We need to cause some adaptations to occur in the muscle and tendons and the neuromuscular system that will lead to this athlete to be able to handle those forces and in turn jump higher. You're basically tricking your body to be able to launch up in the air as high as possible. Now, there's a very easy way to implement these plyometrics into your program. It is by having a jump session at least once a week in conjunction to your strength training. Eventually, there will be a point of diminishing returns. This graph shows what diminishing returns are, right? You get a lot of gains later on and then it levels off. As you become a more advanced athlete, you have to start using more advanced plyometrics in order to implement variety into your training. However, if you're watching this is most likely not you, and jumping once a week is enough. The order of the exercises is very, very important. You want to do the higher intensity, more specific stuff later on so that you can do it with high quality without you being fatigued, so that it becomes more intense. Something cool about plyometrics is that they self-intensify. So the faster you're running and the higher you're gonna be jumping, the higher the forces you're gonna be experiencing, which is gonna cause a bigger adaptation. And as you become better, this becomes more and more magnified. So they self-intensify, right? You don't have to just add weight to intensify it. They just become harder as you get better. And because you wanna do these with higher quality, you wanna do it in the beginning of the programs. So do your explosive stuff early, like sprinting, and your cleans, do that first in the workout, then do your more specific strength exercises next, and then do your accessory work last. In terms of the schedule, this is a very simple schedule you can follow. Sprinting, cleans, and your strength training sessions 3 times per week. Do it on Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. Do your jump session on Friday. As far as your jump session, literally go out and jump as hard as you can with a goal in mind. So that can be trying to touch something, that can be dunking. Do that for an hour or two. Cut the session as soon as you see a big drop in performance. And again, repeat that for 3 weeks, deload on the 4th week, and you're gonna jump way higher at the end of that deload. Then rinse and repeat every single month. However, how do you do this without getting hurt? Specifically, how do you do it without experiencing knee pain, which is the most common injury? You have to use load management principles. And I'm gonna give you guys just a simple way to do this. Choose a provocative pain test that hurts your knees every single morning. Do it once. Rate that on a scale from 1 to 10. If the pain goes up from day to day, that means whatever you did that first day was too much, and you need to decrease the intensity. The best way to do this is to remove the most specific stuff first. If you're still feeling pain, you have to switch your training plan to do slow squats essentially. Load up at least 70% of your max, go 4 seconds down, 4 seconds up. Do that every other day. You also want to be doing isometrics every single day. Put a kettlebell on your foot. You can grab your shin and push out against your hand, against the force of your hands pulling in. As long as you're at 70% effort, do that 30 to 45 seconds, 3 to 5 sets, 2 to 3 times every single day. And then you want to bleed the more specific stuff in later on. However, this is probably too advanced for the scope of this video. And if you want me to coach you through that process of tendon rehab, or if you just want to get coached by me to just jump higher, even if you're healthy, go to THPstrength.com or click the link in the description. We actually have a big discount going on, so take advantage of it right now. That's it for the video. Hopefully this helps you jump higher. Catch you guys next time. Peace out.